This is the video for 1-4 properties of real numbers. We are actually going to deviate from the book just for this one section for various reasons. But before you watch this video, go ahead and hit pause if you haven't done this already. I need you to go ahead and print out the handout that I gave you and also your homework assignment. There are no notes, but make sure you have printed out your homework assignment and your handout. If you have not done that yet, hit pause and go ahead and do that. You're going to need both of those while you watch this video. But I have here the handout and I want to go over the properties. Most of these you have learned before. There are only a couple of them that are going to be new. So the first property is the distributive property, and you have learned that before. Here I take the 4 and I literally distribute it into each term that is inside the parentheses. The next property is the commutative property, and you have the commutative property of addition and the commutative property of multiplication. And what that says is order does not matter. I can switch the order, but they're still going to be equal to each other. That a plus 6 is the same thing as 6 plus a mathematically. 2 times a is going to equal a times 2. Mathematically, they are equal. The way I think about it is my commute from home to school and then my commute from school to home is going to be the same distance. It doesn't matter which way I'm going, it's the same number of miles. Remember, the commutative property does not apply to subtraction and division. The associative property of addition and multiplication says it does not matter who I associate with, who I'm grouped with, the value will not change. So for example, here I have a plus 4 grouped or associated together. And over here I have x plus a. And so it does not matter who we group or associate with. It's not going to change the value. It's not going to change these are still going to be equal to each other. Now note, this only works when all of the signs here are addition. This only works when all of the signs here are multiplication. If you have different signs, then it won't work because of order of operations. Whenever you're dealing with different signs, you're dealing with order of operations. And then, as we learned from another section, yeah, if you group it, that can change your answer dramatically. But if all the signs are the same, if they're all addition or if they're all multiplication, how you group it will not change the value. And then you have your identity properties, your identity property of addition and your identity property of multiplication. Your identity property of addition says I can add 0 to anything and I'm not going to change its value. I'm not going to change its identity. And the identity property of multiplication says I can multiply anything by 1 and I'm not going to change its identity. I'm not going to change its value. Your inverse properties of addition and multiplication. Your inverse property says, your inverse property of addition says the goal is to get to 0. The inverse property of multiplication says the goal is to get to 1. And so how do I get to 0 with addition? I add the opposite. So the inverse property of addition, you add the opposite and you get to 0. The inverse property of multiplication, how do I get to 1? I multiply a number by its reciprocal. So the inverse property of multiplication, you multiply a number by its reciprocal and you will get to 1. The reflexive property. The reflexive property pretty much says you are relating something to itself. The reflexive property of equality simply states that the value is equal to itself. X plus 5 equals x plus 5. Now, the symmetric property, the symmetric property of equality states that you can interchange the sides of an equation and the equation is still a true statement. If x plus 6 equals 8, then 8 equals x plus 6. These are new. You probably have not learned those yet. Here's another one that's probably new and you have not learned yet. If x equals 1 plus 2 and 1 plus 2 equals 3, then x equals 3. This is deductive reasoning. We are taking two known facts and we are inferring a third statement. So this is like saying all men are mortal and Harold is a man. Therefore, Harold is mortal. It's deductive reasoning. It's logic. So we're taking what we know about this and we're taking what we know about this statement and then we are inferring a third statement. That is the transitive property. Another example of that is, let's say, the cafeteria serves tacos on Thursday, and tacos make me happy. Therefore, I can infer I'm going to be happy on Thursday. That's that deductive logic that is the transitive property. This is the substitution property. In the substitution property, I'm just substituting. Here, I'm saying that 5 plus 3 is the same as 8. I'm substituting 8 in for 5 plus 3. And finally, your zero product property. Whenever I multiply something by 0, I get 0. This is a super important property in algebra. This one's used more in This one's used a lot in geometry, but the zero product property is really important in algebra, and we'll talk more about why later. But if I say A times B equals 0, then because of the zero product property, I can assume that either A or B equals 0. And then with that information, I can do a lot, and we'll talk more about that in another chapter. So again, I did deviate from the book for a few reasons. The first reason is I think the book's very limited in the properties it teaches. You do need to know more than just the few it throws out. And I also think it's a little confusing. So print out your homework assignment sheet, and what I want you to do right now, I want you to look at numbers 1 through 21. Right now, I want you to do numbers 1 through 21 odd. Do numbers 1 through, pause this video and do numbers 1 through 21 odd, and then go ahead and play the video. Okay, so you should have gone over numbers 1 through 21 odd, and we're going to go over those together, and then you can do the rest for homework. So if you have any questions on any of these, you don't understand and you got it wrong and don't understand what you did, then just email me. X plus y equals y plus x is the commutative property of addition. I'm switching the orders but not changing the value. K plus 0 equals k is the identity property of addition. I can add 0 to anything I want. I'm not going to change its identity. This is an example of the distributive property. I'm taking these 6 and I'm distributing it into each term. This is the associative property of addition. I'm changing who I associated with, who it's grouped with, who's grouped with who. I'm changing that. This is the commutative property of multiplication. Again, I'm switching the order, but not changing the value. This is the identity property of addition. I can add 0 to anything, and I'm not changing the identity. I'm not changing the value. This is the reflexive property. The reflexive property is when something is relating to itself. X equals x is the reflexive property. 1 times y equals y is the identity property of multiplication. I can multiply anything I want by 1, and I'm not going to change its value. 0 equals 0 times 12 is the zero product property. I can multiply anything by 0 and it's going to be 0. This is the symmetric property. If 12 equals 17 minus 5, then 17 minus 5 equals 12, the symmetric property. I'm interchanging the sides, but it's the same thing. And finally, this is the substitution property. I'm substituting 4 plus 6 with 10, substitution property. Okay, so go ahead and finish this sheet and then check your answers and email me if you have any questions.